Hello all. Well, this is Praying Hebrews video number 18. Today we're going to talk about Hebrews chapter 12, verse 18 through chapter 13 and verse 6. We are near the end of our study of Hebrews, aren't we? And all the way through this study, our author's objective has been to stabilize his readers in their faith and to convince them that there is no alternative open to them except Christ. I want us to talk first of all about this first section, Hebrews chapter 12, verses 18 through 24. And if you don't mind, I want to read it for us because I think it's such an inspirational passage. You have not come to something that can be touched, a blazing fire and darkness and gloom and a tempest and the sound of a trumpet and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that not another word be spoken to them. By the way, he's talking here about Sinai, isn't he? And when the people received the law of Moses at Mount Sinai, and what a terrifying sight that was for the people to experience and to see. And then verse 24, they could not endure the order that was given. If even an animal touches the mountain, it shall be stoned to death. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But now he's going to contrast Sinai with Zion. But, verse 22, you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to innumerable angels in festive gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, judge of all, and to the spirits of just people made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. In this passage, our author is placing before his readers one final contrast between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, as he contrasts Sinai and Zion, as I said. Now, Sinai, outward and physical by nature, accompanied by awful terrors, shut God away from people and made it plain that they could not draw near. But Zion, on the other hand, which is spiritual and eternal, brings people into heaven itself, to the realm of angels and good men and women made perfect, to God and to Christ, whose blood has opened the way to draw near to God. The privileges of the new era, therefore, are very great, our author wants his readers to know. Those privileges demand a reception and an appreciation of those privileges and a life of true holiness. And it's as if he wants his readers to answer this rhetorical question. Why, he says, why should we settle for a mess of pottage as Esau did when we have received a heavenly calling? Our author is talking about the heavenly city in this passage. It's comprised of select inhabitants. When a person becomes a Christian, he or she becomes at the same time a citizen of the heavenly city, which is composed of innumerable angels, of members of the church on earth, and of the departed saints. He or she gains direct access to the God of all and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. And what is it that brings us into this heavenly city? It is the sprinkled blood of Jesus, verse 24, the sacrifice that Jesus made in behalf of each one of us. Then comes one final appeal in verses 25 through 29. And let me read this section for us. See that you do not refuse the one who is speaking. For if they did not escape, they, meaning the Israelites in the Old Covenant, under the Old Covenant, if they did not escape when they refused the one who warned them on earth, how much less will we escape if we reject the one who warns from heaven? At that time his voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, yet once more I will shake not only the earth but also the heavens. This phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of what is shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, Since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us give thanks, by which we offer to God an acceptable worship with reverence and awe. For indeed, our God is a consuming fire. See that you do not refuse the one who is speaking. Verse 25. The one who is speaking is God. And why should we not refuse the one who urges us to keep the faith? The reason our author gives in this passage is that if the first covenant could not be rejected without retribution, then certainly the second one cannot be. One day, he writes, everything that we can see and touch will be dissolved. All will pass away. All created things are destined to decay. But that which cannot be shaken will remain. Even now, Christians are in the process of receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, that will not disappear or decay over time. We are in the process of receiving the eternal kingdom. We're part of a kingdom that cannot be moved. It's stable and lasting, and we should be grateful for this, the writer tells us. Therefore, let us give thanks, verse 28. His point in verse 28 is that remembering the majesty of God goes a long way toward checking digression and apostasy. And we learn much about God in the closing verses of chapter 12, don't we? Our God is indeed a gracious God, but he's also a consuming fire, the writer tells us in the very last verse of that chapter. That is, he's a jealous God. Yes, he's a God of love, but too often this description of him is distorted and makes him something that he is not and has never been. As we close chapter 12, then, we are left to consider the stern side of God's nature. Well, the author has completed his argument through chapter 12, and in chapter 13, verses 1 through 6, he offers various exhortations. Let brotherly love continue, chapter 13 and verse 1. Two specific imperatives go with brotherly love. Showing hospitality, this refers to providing care for traveling Christians, and caring for those in prison. Now, the original readers had already done that, chapter 10 and verse 34, probably in the midst of some local persecution. Now, the encouragement is to make this a general way of life. The principle taught here is that of the Golden Rule. They were to imagine themselves in prison and then to treat their oppressed brothers and sisters as they would want to be treated if they were in prison. And then next is the command to maintain sexual purity. Let marriage be held in honor, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, our author writes. The marriage bed is a euphemism for the physical intimacy of married life. Whoever defiles it and severs the marital ties falls under God's judgment. That is verse 4. Then follows a second warning, this time a warning not against sexual immorality, but a warning against greed. And think of these two sins, sexual immorality and greed, as devastating to spirituality. What we should do, the author says, is not put our trust in money, but to put our trust in God, who has promised to never leave or forsake us. I love that passage. We can be content with what we have, and we cannot succumb to the love of money because we have a God beside us who is enough. He's all we need. I love that thought. Okay, what is it that inspired you or meant the most to you in this text? The picture of the heavenly city of which all of us are citizens? How about the warning about the stern side of God and that he would come in judgment against those who reject Christ? Or perhaps you were struck by the assurance that God will never leave his children. I like the thought that if we have God, we have enough, that he will never desert us. Persecution may come upon us. We may lose all of our earthly possessions. We might be threatened with physical injury, but God will never desert us. Yes, if we have God, we have enough, and we can be content in that knowledge. That's challenging, I know, but it's also comforting. All right, we're just 2 weeks from the completion of our study of Hebrews. A week or so after the beginning of the new year, 2020, we will begin a study of the Gospel of Luke. We have not prayed through one of the 4 Gospels together, so I would like for us to read through, pray through, and consider Luke's Gospel after we finish the letter to the Hebrews. But as I said, that will wait for the second week or so in January of 2020. I'll tell you more about that later. For now, there is still a lot of meat on the bone in Hebrews chapter 13, and I plan to send out our next video review on December the 6th, I believe it is. And until then, keep up the good work, brothers and sisters. Keep up the good work. God bless.